You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Abby Wexler.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. We've got a great show lined up for you today. Be sure to go to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show. No matter how you listen, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Pandora, Spotify, or YouTube, you can subscribe to the show and never miss an episode. I'd like to thank some sponsors today. Scribophile is a respectful online writing workshop and writers community. Writers of all skill levels join to improve each other's work with thoughtful critiques and by sharing their writing experiences. We're the writing group to join if you want to find beta readers, get the best feedback around, learn how to get published, and be a part of the friendliest and most successful writing workshop online. Improve your writing by receiving detailed critiques. Learn from a vast collection of free writing resources. Make lifelong friends in our busy community of writers. Writing is a solitary art, but that doesn't mean you have to be lonely. Lucky for you, there are thousands of writers on Scribophile every day, and we're a really friendly bunch. You've never seen a writing group like this one? Join Scribophile today at scribophile.community. For the Words is a unique writing motivator unlike anything I've seen. For the Words is an online writing platform which motivates writers of all backgrounds to increase their word count through gamification. Writing can be challenging, especially when you need to consistently produce a high output of words. By injecting a little fun into the routine and using daily rewards to promote a healthy writing habit, For the Words makes it easier to reach that word count. We're a community of bloggers, professional authors, college and high school students, research scientists, gamers, and first-time writers from all over the world. Come for the words, stay for the fun. Go to that's the number 4, thewords.com. Both Sides of the Law, the Casper Halliday Nypd series, Book 1 by Nathan Roden. He shared his father's dream of becoming a detective. A prison sentence was not part of his plan. Casper Halliday's dream began to unravel 2 months before his 16th birthday. His father, Bobby, resigned from the NYPD after 15 years without an explanation. Casper's parents fought. Sirens closed in on their home from every direction. The sound that had always been a source of comfort now brought only humiliation. Bobby Halliday moved out. Casper's dream dissolved into a daily fight for survival. All he wanted now was to finish high school so he could ease his mother's burden. On his 17th birthday, in the throes of depression, Casper made a bad decision. That decision brought him face to face with one of the most dangerous men in the city. In Casper's world, there is laughter and there are tears. There's light and there's bitter darkness. There are improbable friends and unspeakable enemies. The Casper Halliday NYPD series launches with the most unlikely of beginnings. Read Both Sides of the Law today. The ebook edition includes a sneak peek of Ghost Man, Book 2 in the series. Writers, the internet is one of the best tools for research and creativity. It can also be one of the biggest hindrances to productivity, distracting you from doing the seat in the chair, hand on keyboard work. Rescue Time gives you an accurate picture of how you spend your time to help you become more productive every single day. Spot inefficiencies in your day and become better at managing your time. Create a goal like spending less than 1 hour per day on email to help you stay focused. Set an alarm to tell you when you spent more than 2 hours on Facebook. Try Rescue Time and use our special discount code for 30% off a Rescue Time premium account by going to rescuetime.com/authorstories. Let us help you rescue your time. Before we get into our show with Lauren Meckling, we have an audio excerpt, excerpted courtesy Penguin Random House Audio, from How Could She by Lauren Meckling, narrated by Brittany Presley. Thanks for listening. Before we get into today's interview with Laura Griffin, We're going to play an audiobook excerpt from her brand new book. Audio excerpt courtesy of Simon & Schuster Audio from Her Deadly Secrets by Laura Griffin. Read by Madeline Mabey. Copyright 2019 by Laura Griffin, used with permission from Simon & Schuster, Inc. Take a listen to this and we'll jump right into our interview with Laura Griffin.
Kira Vance gripped the steering wheel and navigated the slick streets. The summer downpour had come out of nowhere, catching her off guard. She'd wanted to make a good impression, and now she was going to arrive not just late, but soaking wet in a white t-shirt that was nearly transparent. Water dripped onto her shoulder as she reached a stoplight, and she glared up at her leaky sunroof. There was no denying it. She needed a new car. Her little Celica had 6-digit mileage and a bad transmission, but she refused to trade it in. She couldn't afford an upgrade, and the car had been with her through so many ups and downs, she was sentimental about it. The phone chimed on the seat beside her, but she ignored it because it was Ollie, her shrewd, rude, and sometimes infuriating boss. She didn't want to talk to him on the phone. She needed a face-to-face. As Kira skidded away from the intersection, her car's engine warning light flashed on. "Son of a bitch," she muttered. She'd just had it in for an oil change, and the guy had said he'd checked everything. But people lied. Often. If they didn't, she'd be out of a job. Kira's work was a search for the truth. The good, the bad, and the ugly. She dug up the facts and let the lawyers deal with them in court. Or not. Sometimes her discoveries meant a witness wouldn't be called to testify, or the defense team would develop a new strategy. Sometimes her discoveries poked big fat holes in the case of a zealous prosecutor. The truth cut both ways, and that's what she liked about it. Finding that truth gave her a heady rush that made up for the downsides of PI work, such as dealing with cheating spouses and deadbeat dads and insurance scams. Those were the cases that made her pissed off and cynical. Another thing that pissed her off? Unpaid invoices. Ollie was 3 weeks behind on a big one, and he was the master of the dodge, which was one reason she'd decided to track him down in person tonight to deliver her news. Kira reached the street that turned into River Oaks, where stately houses sat far back on manicured lawns. The thunderstorm had brought an early evening, and the thick St. Augustine grass looked almost neon green in the eerie light. Cars lined both sides of the street. Someone down the block was having a party, apparently, which seemed odd for a Tuesday. A red Jaguar glided up to the curb ahead, and a valet sprang out and sprinted past her. Kira spotted Ollie's no-nonsense Ford parked at the base of a steep driveway. She wedged her car between a pair of Mercedes SUVs and cut the engine as she looked around. This was it. Mount Logan. Named for Brock Logan, managing partner at the law firm that had hired Ollie to investigate its big cases. Kira had thought the name was a reference to Brock Logan's oversized ego, but she saw now that she'd been wrong, at least partially. The house perched atop a hill on a large corner lot, elevated above the other mansions in Houston's most exclusive neighborhood. Kira had never set foot inside a River Oaks home, and her curiosity was mixed with professional ambition. Besides confronting Ollie, she was here to do some business development. It was high time for her to meet Ollie's big fish client, who'd been keeping her in ramen noodles and Netflix these past 3 years. She'd never met the man, because Ollie liked her to stay behind the scenes. But those days were over.
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Laura Griffin on the show with me today. She has an amazing new book. It's called Her Deadly Secrets, and if you're looking for a great summertime suspense novel, this one will definitely fit the bill. I love it, and I know you will too. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. Laura, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, my gosh. You know, I think it probably dates back to when I was in elementary school and I got hooked on the Nancy Drew series, and I just read those books one after the other, and I just was addicted. And so I think ever since then I've had an interest in stories, particularly mysteries, and I just wanted to read everything that she wrote. So
Nancy Drew has made more appearances on this show than in any other character, shall we say. That's it's so funny. Funny, not hilarious, but kind of. It's so funny to look back to see how many people were affected by that series of books, and there was something just kind of magical about it. One, there were lots of them, and but so many people had their imaginations opened by that series of books. Women, men, across the whole landscape.
I've run into quite a few mystery writers that have that same connection to these books when they were young. So for me, they were in a bookcase in my grandmother's house, and I just remember, it was after I'd kind of learned to read and just started getting into fiction and reading independently, and I just found this bookshelf, and I just one after the other wanted to read every single one. So and there, when you're a kid, there's that sense of accomplishment when you finish one and move to the next one, and so I was hooked.
Well, and it's not only it's not only a sense of accomplishment for finishing them, but there's something about when a book just feels like it's for you. Like you said, when you're learning to read independently, and when you stumble upon something for yourself, and you feel like that these are my thing. It kind of becomes an identity thing in some ways.
That's right, and you just kind of melt into that world.
Yeah, I love it. Did your love of mystery stick with you from that point?
It did. I kind of moved into other types of fiction, but I remember in middle school I discovered Stephen King and started reading some of his and talk about getting hooked on an author. I mean, he just has this way of gripping you with just the very first scene. And so, I've read a number of his books too. And I got into commercial fiction. I really love to read, just things that were, in the grocery store and things that were, at the very front of the library, where near the checkout desk. So I just really love those stories with the kind of creepy plots and the murder mysteries or the creepy things going on, the unexplained, paranormal, things like that. So that was kind of what grabbed my interest when I was a kid.
Well, the one thing that I love about Stephen King is, his books can be all over the genre landscape. They can be about a lot of things, but what they all do is make you feel connected to a set of characters and to a place, and that place becomes you feel comfortable there, and it kind of feels like a place that and then the rug is pulled out from under you, and and your writing is similar in that way. Like in Her Deadly Secrets, we immediately meet Kira Vance, and we're kind of absorbed into her and her world almost immediately. Do you think about characters when you begin to write, and how do you find that character that people are going to resonate with?
Every story starts with a character for me, and in this case, I was just really intrigued by this private investigator. Her book comes after another book that featured a criminal defense attorney, and that book was called Desperate Girls. And I interviewed a friend of mine who is a defense attorney to write that story, and just kind of got into her world about, what she does in her day-to-day job. I love to interview people before I write a book. And she mentioned her investigator, and I just was really kind of fascinated by that, the idea that she would have this private investigator who could help her, learn more of the facts of the case and uncover information. And so then I started thinking about this idea of, that would be an interesting story. That would be an interesting viewpoint on an investigation, not the cop or the lawyer, but this investigator, this private investigator, and how her viewpoint could be different than, a lot in fiction you see a detective, a police detective, but this is more of someone who's in a little more position to break the rules because she's she's a private person. She's not working for a police department. And so that, when you're writing fiction, that gives you a lot of latitude to do different things in the plot. And so Kira is a rule breaker, and I wanted that to kind of come through from the very beginning. And she's determined, and she's tenacious, and she doesn't mind bending the rules if she's trying to do her job. So that was fun for me from a writing perspective.
I love the idea of approaching a story from a different vantage point. And, there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of books about criminal defense attorneys, and we've seen just about every story turned just about every way we can. But I don't know of any stories that are, take place from the investigator's point of view. And that's a whole different viewpoint that opens up limitless possibilities. I know that you spent time as a journalist, and that you still consider yourself a journalist in a lot of ways. Did that time in doing that job and learning those skills, did that help you to look for those different ways of seeing the story so that you could tell the story differently?
Absolutely. I mean, I still feel like that's been really my most valuable training. First of all, just from a practical standpoint, that was where I learned to have deadlines. When you're out covering a breaking news story, if you don't get your story in on time, it doesn't go in the paper the next day, and by the next day, it's old news. So I learned to kind of have a discipline of writing, gathering the facts, writing quickly, meeting deadlines, sometimes aggressive deadlines, and just always kind of being aware of that kind of ticking clock. And the other thing about news is news writing, you're allotted a certain number of inches of column space depending on what's in the paper, and you really have to grab the reader up top. You can't put the most interesting information buried deep in the story. You have to grab someone's attention and move them through the story. And so that's something I always think about, especially when I sit down to start a new book. How am I going to intrigue the reader right away? Don't waste time. Don't waste their time. People are busy. They don't have time to 4 chapters in before they take an interest in the characters. So you have to get their attention quickly. And so so that was certainly something that, news reporting helped me to do. But it also, I became interested in the crime beat. When I was first working for a newspaper, I was kind of low man on the totem pole and had to do, evenings, weekends, holidays, some of the shifts that not everybody wants. But the good thing about that was that when you're covering weekends, you cover whatever crime happens over the weekend. And so if some breaking news thing happens, you have to rush out and do that. And I just became really intrigued by the crime stories. So when it came time to write fiction, that was what really kind of drew me in right away, was writing about a crime and kind of going in depth and the story behind the story kind of thing.
Didn't you also spend time as a travel journalist?
Yeah, I moved. I was working for a newspaper outside of Chicago, and then my husband and I were transferred overseas. We lived in Hong Kong and Manila in the Philippines, and so while we were living over there, I did a lot of travel writing for a magazine that was like targeted at the expats living in that region. And so, it just made it an adventure for me because I love to travel anyway. And so to kind of have an assignment while you travel, best restaurants, best coffee shops, best secret places to go, kind of trying to bring that to life for a reader. So that was fun for me. It was a fun adventure.
Has the travel writing helped in, say, world building, if you want to call it that, in your books?
Yes. I think that it's the details that really bring a place to life. And so even just certain, turns of phrase, ways of speaking, just, local details that can make things, foods, for example, are another thing that I love to kind of weave into the different stories depending on where they're set. So, yeah, I think the more details you can bring in, the more that the place feels unique and your reader can kind of feel immersed in that space. So if you can just pull in those details that are different about a place.
How many books do you have published now? It's quite an impressive back catalog now.
Yeah. I think actually Her Deadly Secrets is the 20th book print book, full-length print book,
Nice.
which is exciting. And in fact, my husband and I toasted the book the other day when it came out because, it's kind of a milestone for me, 20 books. And then in addition to that, I've had a number of novellas come out, and then I have a series that's a digital series called the Alpha Crew series, and all those books are ebooks. So, but in terms of the print books that I have on my bookshelf all lined up in a row, there's 20 print books.
I love
So
it.
that's exciting.
What was the first one, and what was the impetus that moved you from journalism to fiction writing?
Well, the first book is called One Last Breath, and interestingly, the heroine of that book is a newspaper reporter, and so it was for me. It was easy to get into her viewpoint because I was coming from a place of having been a newspaper reporter, and so I kind of thought that would be a fun point of view that I felt comfortable telling. This was my first book, and so it felt like a natural transition to me. And so she's a newspaper reporter that gets kind of pulled into this murder investigation and, uncovering all these clues. And so that book came out, I believe in 2007. And so that was book one in a series of two, and then I had two more, and then I began what is the Tracer series, which is kind of a long-running series that I've been writing for quite a while, and that series has 13 books.
Gotcha. Did the first novel that you wrote, did that book get published?
It didn't. In fact, for me, and I know everyone has a different story, but for me, the third time was the charm. I wrote two manuscripts that didn't get published, and just kept at it, and the third manuscript got published. And so, I always tell writers, people come up and they're aspiring writers and they say, I have a book that I've been working on, or I've always wanted to write a book. And, the thing is you just have to be very tenacious, and you have to just keep at it, expect that you're going to get some doors slammed in your face, but you just have to keep going. And if you have a story that you want to write, you just have to be persistent about it, and don't give up and don't get discouraged. Just keep going.
Right. Writers are interesting people in that there's something special about a person who will spend so much time writing a novel, and it's a lot of time that you spend alone writing, and then maybe that one is not the one, and you just get a blank page and start all over again, and that there's not a lot of other artistic expressions or jobs that people do that are that tenacious, and that it's almost like there's a driving force that makes you write whether there's commercial success with that or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people, it can be a long haul between the time you first kind of sit down to try this and have any kind of success or positive feedback. So, you have to just be willing to put in the hours. But, I think it's worth it. I think it's the best job in the world. I love being able to focus on things that I'm interested in and learn. One of my favorite aspects of writing a news story is to go out and interview the people that have the jobs of the people I'm writing about. So, for example, if I'm in order to write Her Deadly Secrets, there's the hero in the story, a private bodyguard, and so he's in charge of personal security for private individuals. And in order to kind of get inside the mindset of that, I interviewed a Secret Service agent, which was really fun and exciting, and just kind of learn about their job and their ups and their downs and just some of the trials of that job and challenges of that job. So I like to kind of get into the heads of the people I'm writing about and interview people and find out what their world is like. And that's just always been one of the most interesting aspects of writing fiction for me, is to actually start with the nonfiction, start with people who really do that, and go from there.
I know that Her Deadly Secrets is the third of your standalone books, I believe, but you also have this long-running series, the Tracer series. What's the Tracer series about?
The Tracer series focuses on the umbrella over the whole series is this forensic crime lab called the Delphi Center, where they're able to use all the most cutting to help solve crimes. And the idea kind of came about because I was writing, these suspense stories, and I was interviewing a lot of detectives, and we were touring a crime lab, and I was just really struck by how many, the number of rape kits that were just sitting there, just all this evidence, boxes and boxes of cold case evidence. And the universal complaint is that, people have these, budget constraints. And so it's not like CSI on television where everything happens in 24 hours and everybody has these, cutting edge, equipment that they can use anytime they want. So I wanted to write a fictional series in which if you did have those tools at your disposal, what could you really do? Because there's so much forensic technology available, but not all law enforcement agencies are able to use it because, of budget constraints and time constraints. So that's kind of what the Delphi Center does, is they have kind of all the best cutting edge technology, and they've got these forensic experts. And so each different story in that series focuses on a different crime, and there's all these different experts that come in, forensic anthropologists or ballistic experts or DNA people, DNA experts. So just to interview people in those professions and learn what they do. To me, it's fascinating.
I love that. When you have a long-running series like the Tracer series, and then you also have your fantastic standalone books, is there are there things that you like about writing the existing series and having existing characters and things like that? And do you sometimes have to get away from that and write something completely different so that the series can stay fresh and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I like about writing the Tracers series has been that it's not one continuing character throughout each book. It's the kind of the theme that connects them all is this forensics lab. And so when I get kind of bored with one thing, I can just shift over into something else. So, for example, the most recent Tracers book is called Stone Cold Heart, and it came out in March. And the heroine in that book is a forensic anthropologist. And so that was just a whole new area that I got to explore and, interview forensic anthropologists that do that job. But they're the bones experts. I don't know if you've seen the television show Bones, but it's people who can study bones and find out how, manner of death, how someone died, help police investigators based on studying the bones. So, so I love to kind of move around. I love to kind of go from different areas to one to another, and interview different people for every different book. So that's part of the fun for me of writing fiction.
Well, the new book, Her Deadly Secrets, we've got Kira that we mentioned earlier, and Kira is just going about her life when everything kind of goes upside down on her. When you first started thinking about this story, what came to you first? And is that a normal process for you? Do you start thinking about maybe a news headline and thinking about, well, what if, it happens here? Or is it a setting? Is it a particular character trait? How does the story usually begin and then start to evolve for you?
For me, a lot of the ideas that come straight out of the news, because there's so many fascinating things that you can, just skimming news headlines. In this case, I was intrigued by the idea of, this high-profile murder trial happening, and there's this investigator that's working for the defense side, defending this guy that's been accused of murdering his wife. He's this wealthy doctor, and I was thinking about the idea of, well, what if he was framed? What if he really didn't do it? So then I've got this private investigator who's kind of trying to put together what really happened. And that was kind of the story hook that I had in mind. I wanted to really kind of find some interesting plot twists with that. So Kira was definitely key to the whole original idea. And sometimes it's a setting. Sometimes a setting can almost be like its own character. In the case of this story, it's set in Houston, which is where I grew up. Kind of behind the scenes things I wanted to weave into the story, just based on living in Houston when I was growing up, and knowing the city really well. And I just wanted to kind of weave in those details because to me that's fun when you can really make your setting more real for people.
Other than maybe specific landmarks, what are some very Houston things that you included in the story?
Well, in the story, the city, in its reference, kind of just early on in the story, there's references to Hurricane Harvey. So the city of Houston is still reeling from that natural disaster. It's almost 2 years later, and you can still see the effects across the city. And just personally, my parents' home was destroyed by the hurricane. Their home was flooded, and so they were in the part of the city where they had the bayous were rising, and the homes were flooding, the neighborhoods were flooding, and people were being rescued in kayaks and small skiffs. People were coming in. These volunteers were coming in and getting people out of their homes that were flooded, and so it was a very traumatic event for so many Houstonians, and a lot of people haven't recovered from it. So, if I was going to set something in that city, I wanted to make sure that was part of the story because it's still just like at the forefront of many people's minds.
There's we went through Hurricane Katrina, 15 years ago or whatever it is now. And I'll tell you what, there in our little town here in South Mississippi, there are still things that you see, trees that were uprooted, and there are still reminders everywhere. And it's one of those things that is a slow healing process.
It is,
and it leaves its marks on the city.
It does leave physical marks, and then it also leaves kind of psychological marks. I mean,
exactly.
I never had really thought about rain in the same way. It's just there's this feeling of dread when you have this ongoing rain that just won't stop. It just keeps coming down, and the waters are rising, and it just won't stop. And I think people are still affected by that. It's been 2 years, but it definitely had an impact on everybody. So that's part of that setting. But anywhere you go, writing a story in a different place, there's all these different details that you can weave in, whether it's the people, the dialect, the food, just ways to kind of give a little bit more color to your story.
Right. There was another aspect of the book that I found interesting, the kind of socioeconomic disparity between characters in the book. And I think it was probably in the first chapter or very close to the front of the book. You talk about Kira, how she'd never been in a River Oaks home. But she was talking about her client who kept her in ramen noodles and Netflix, for the previous few years. And that was so evocative. Just that one sentence it kind of let me know a lot of things about Kira and about her clients and just kind of the way she saw the world. And how do you look for those little things that tell us so much without giving a big dissertation on her life? We can glean so much from that right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about just finding the details that kind of illustrate, people's lives. I don't know, maybe it's the newspaper training, but just always trying to listen to people, just no matter where you are, you're going about your day, your errands, whatever, and just kind of tuning in to people that aren't like you when you're going about your life, and trying to just listen to what they say, listen to how they speak, listen to what they're talking about. I'm a big eavesdropper. If I'm ever on, the subway, or if I'm ever in an airport, or wherever, I kind of like to kind of overhear what people are talking about and how they're talking to each other. Kind of a people watcher too. I mean, I like to just watch people, and to me that's interesting. So I don't know, just finding details that kind of bring someone to life. Again, that's something that you try to do in a news article. You've got a very limited amount of space, and so you can't describe everything about a person or a place. So you have to kind of choose one or two things that kind of create an image for the reader, and so that's just part of it.
If someone is not familiar with the kinds of books that you write, how would you describe your writing style or what they can expect from a Laura Griffin book?
I think all my stories have an element of suspense, and then beneath that, there's kind of usually there's a layer of romance under that. I like to have a focus on the relationships in the book because I think that kind of draws people in. It's something that draws me in when I'm reading a book. I don't just want to hear what happens, with say the murder mystery, but I want to know what the relationships are between the detective and the, whatever the characters are. So a lot of my books have a suspense story, and then there's a romance woven into that story. And I don't know, in terms of writing style, I would say it's pretty straightforward. I don't spend a lot of time on elaborate descriptions. In fact, one comment my editors made over the years is I oftentimes forget to describe what people are wearing because that's not a big thing for me. I don't really care. And so sometimes I have to go back and weave that in just so that people get a sense of, they feel grounded in the scene. But yeah, so I would say pretty straightforward writing style, I guess.
Is there a difference to you in suspense and what we might think of as traditional mystery?
Well, I guess mysteries, to me, mysteries, when I think about a mystery, I think it has a little bit more of a structure. I think about, kind of the old-fashioned Agatha Christie structure where there's a crime, there's the investigation, it all wraps up in a neat thing at the end, and it's a little bit more of a structure. Suspense, I think, can even encompass thrillers where, it's more kind of action, moment to moment, kind of more cliffhangers, more twists and turns, I feel. So, and that might just be my own personal way of thinking about it based on, just reading a lot in the genre. But for me, I like suspense where there's a lot of action. I like it to almost feel like a movie, where you're going from there's an exciting scene, and then there's a chance to kind of catch your breath, and then the pace picks up again, and then there's a cliffhanger, and it just kind of keeps going and going and going.
Gotcha. With 20 books in print on your shelf now, as we talked about earlier, and looking through your back catalog, probably 30 or more total writing projects between your other digital series and collaborations and things that you've done. Has your writing process changed over building this catalog?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, and yes, it has. I mean, first of all, it's gotten more efficient. Yeah, exactly. It's definitely gotten more efficient. I've learned to write more quickly. I've learned that I can write anywhere. That's something I learned early on because I didn't have a designated office. I was spending a lot of time writing in coffee shops or busy places, waiting on my kids to finish, a soccer practice or something like that. So I can write anywhere. That's definitely been new. And just the developing the confidence of being able to just reach out to people. If you're not a published author, it can feel a little bit intimidating to reach out to interview someone, to try and get, say, a tour of a police department or to interview a detective or someone that you might want to talk to. Once, you have a few publishing credits under your belt, it feels a little more natural to just be able to reach out to people and have them take you seriously as a published author. So now that doesn't faze me at all, whereas when I was just getting started, I felt a little apprehensive. But I love to reach out to people, to interview them, to learn more about what they do. And to me, that can provide so much good color and detail for the stories. So it's always worth the time to really go to a place and talk to people face-to-face, see where they work, whether it's a crime lab or whether it's doing a ride-along with a police officer or, whatever the setting is. Just being with people face-to-face can really add to your story. So, and I do more and more of that. So that's something that's kind of evolved over time as well.
I love it. Her Deadly Secrets is out, available everywhere now, in hardback and Kindle edition and audiobook. I believe every way that you read books, you can get it.
It's also out in paperback too. That's the format that I've been seeing around. I just saw a copy of the paperback edition in the Phoenix airport the other day. So it's out in paperback. Yeah.
Now, is that trade paperback or like mass market
Trade
paperback?
That's right. And
Wow.
I think the hardcover editions are mainly going to libraries. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Just a little bit more affordable.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about trade paperbacks is they're the same size as hardbacks, but you don't have to mortgage your house to
Exactly.
To get them. Yeah.
And it's not as heavy when you're putting it in your bag to take on a trip or something like that.
Exactly. Will we see more of these characters like Kira from Her Deadly Secrets, or maybe Bryn from Desperate Girls? Are there more stories for these characters?
I think you will, because I just always like to bring in characters from previous stories, and in fact, in this story, there is a forensic artist that is in one scene, and she's creating this suspect sketch based on Kira's account of something she saw. That character was from a previous book. So I love to kind of weave them back in, once they've kind of been developed and, maybe have written a whole book about a character, they might appear in another story. So we'll probably be seeing them again.
Cool. Well, I can't wait to see what you come up with. Laura, I'm a big fan. I love what you're doing. I love the new book, Her Deadly Secrets. We're going to send everybody to see you and to pick up their copy of it. If people are just learning about you and want to dig into your back catalog and follow news that's coming up, is there a place they can connect with you online?
That's right. Yeah. LauraGriffin.com.
We'll put links to it in the show notes. Laura, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. Be sure to subscribe at hankgarner.com or on your favorite podcasting app. Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
I was walking through the woods between Wolfert's Roost and the future site of my father's Stone Manor house. The house would eventually stand on what had been old Baltus's pumpkin field, the land where I had found my grandfather's head. Father had chosen the spot for its view of the Hudson River. Knoll was to be a grand mansion in the Gothic Revival style, but at the time the mansion was but a few foundations of Van Brunt stone. I had become fond of the place already, the idea of it, and I spent many a night alone in a shack on the property. My mother disapproved. She would have me sleep in the room across from hers in our townhouse. But I was 15 and did not answer to her. I kept a bottle of spirits hidden in the crook of 2 walnut trees near old Baltus's grave. I thought he would approve of the gesture. I had stopped along my way to fetch it out. At the moment the first pull of liquor touched my throat, I heard a ghastly, inhuman laugh. I was not alone in the woods. Had God sent the horseman after me? Had I sinned that terribly? I ran through the wood and found the field where Knoll was to be built. The outline of the foundations was barely discernible beneath the snow. An apparition stood there. Though I have seen him many times since, I shall never forget my first glimpse. Gaunt in moonlight, headless, exuding power and malice. A magic thing in the land of the ordinary. The headless horseman of Sleepy Hollow. What chills those words evoke. It charged at me, hatchet raised. I stood transfixed, unable to move, unable to even imagine escape. This was the servant of God, after all, sent to strike down sinners. I hurled the bottle from my hand, ashamed that I had become a drunkard as Baltus had been. It shattered against the foundations of Knoll. I stretched out my arms and awaited judgment. A piercing white light broke the darkness. The horse reared. "Not my Dylan!" cried Agatha, appearing from the wood. She held a skull in her hand. It shone brightly as a diamond. And in that moment I understood. The horseman did not serve God. He served my grandmother. Perhaps in that moment I came to see Agatha and God as one and the same. The unholy spirit fought her command. A foreleg of the demon horse struck my head with such power that I fell backwards with a cry and knew no more. I carry the scar to this day. A slight indentation in my temple, barely noticeable. In my days of courting I was told that when I am angry the patch of insulted skull bone will stand out in a disturbing manner. I have never had occasion to see this phenomenon, however, as I am generally well pleased whenever I pass a mirror.